Is there no balm in Gilead? Is there no place of healing, no healer to call for, no tincture or ointment that can be used to salve the wounds? Is there no balm in Gilead? The prophet Jeremiah asks this question from the edge of despair. The Jewish people were in the middle of the Babylonian exile, and this is the predominant use of that phrase, balm in Gilead, in Scripture. A question. The people were suffering. Jeremiah says, we were told there was a balm, but now we're not so sure. Now we wonder if it could be gone or if it were ever there at all. Perhaps there is no hope left for the people. The prophet Jeremiah saw what was going wrong for the people, and he lamented. He cried out, "Is there no hope? Is there no balm?" My colleague Meg Barnhouse has a photograph in her online art collection titled "Broken Buddha." It shows the lap of a painted statue, and one graceful hand is broken off and resting on the sole of an upturned foot. Barnhouse said she's drawn to this image, captivated by the possible meaning. The enlightened one as imperfect, cracked, and chipped. "The enlightened one is still whole," one of the comments under the photo reads. Someone was made nervous by the Buddha's broken hand. Barnhouse writes, the one who wrote that comment wants it to be true, but doesn't know. Maybe you can be enlightened and broken too. Jewish mysticism has a concept called Tikkun Olam. It is a Kabbalist concept that explains how God's love is broken and scattered throughout creation, and that our job as humanity is to gather up the broken pieces and make the world whole. Again and again, the religions of the world wrestle with something we all have noticed. Some religions approach it with more hope or compassion than others, but essentially, all religions recognize that there is much and more that is wrong with the world and with our lives. Whether we're speaking tragedies large or small, personal or global, a few things hold for it all. There is suffering and loss, frustration and heartbreak. We feel in some way broken. And one of the difficulties is that this suffering and hardship and brokenness can break us in an additional way as well. It can break our resolve, our commitment to keep trying. The frustration of ineffective action or hopelessness can break us a second way. Our suffering can create a wall around us that blocks us from seeing the possibility of healing. It becomes a double blow. Our loss and our suffering can blind us, and we are left at times wondering, is there no balm in Gilead? Will we never be relieved of our losses? Must we carry them always? Henry Nouwen proposed a path of openness and vulnerability to help to see our way through the wounding days. A few decades back, Henry Nouwen wrote a powerful book called The Wounded Healer. It quickly became a standard for pastoral theology, and it certainly had a powerful impact on my ministerial and personal development. The premise of the title, The Wounded Healer, is that in our own brokenness, we can become a source of life for others. The bulk of the book, however, is centered on a critique of culture. Nouwen said that we live in a dislocated world. He said we have grown fragmented and rootless, a generation of people who are isolated and lonely and longing for something we cannot name. Nouwen further blamed the society itself, saying that we are driven apart by individualistic and materialistic forces in culture. Healing comes, he said, from a radical stance of hospitality, a welcoming in, a standing forth with all your wounds and brokenness and inviting others in. Suffering is solitary work. Each of us experiences suffering. Each person's heartache and pain is unique to that person and is experienced inwardly. This is the Anna Karenina principle, so named after the opening sentence of Leo Tolstoy's book, Anna Karenina. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Yes, we all suffer and are kin in that, but each person's heartache, each person's pain is unique. Your pain is unique and singular and of towering significance to you alone. I spent the bulk of my adolescence and young adulthood absorbed in my own suffering. Howard Thurman, reflecting on this, writes, "Suffering tends to isolate an individual, to create a wall. It makes his spirit miserable," he wrote, "in the literal sense of that word. Initially, it stops all outward flow of life and makes a virtue of the necessity of turning inward." But later, he adds, "Openings are made in a life by suffering that are not made in any other way. Initially, it isolates us and creates a wall. You all have felt that, yes? And then it offers an opening. Have you felt that? What is the nature of that shift from isolation to openness? How does the balm of Gilead work? What is it exactly? How do we go from dislocation, in Nouwen's words, to hospitality? As the reading suggests, the shift from isolation to opening is akin to miraculous. So don't give up before the miracle occurs. A wise colleague, James Ford, has a book titled, "If You Are Lucky, Your Heart Will Break." Our hearts break because we care. The cost of compassion and love is heavy, and we will carry it with us everywhere. But there is a significant difference between a heart that is simply broken and a heart that is broken open. Our brokenness, my brokenness, is a source of power and beauty. It is the crack through which the water spills out onto the flowers. It is the crack through which compassion and understanding can flow. It has been a cause of suffering for me, mostly when I try to hide my flaws and am embarrassed or ashamed of them, when I allow myself to be limited by my failures. What matters is not my unique brokenness, but my response to it. A colleague, Reverend Kim Crawford Harvey, writes about one way to respond to brokenness that I commend to you. She describes a meal she and her wife were having with her colleague Dan and his husband. Reverend Dan Kane was cooking, she writes, I was washing. And what happened next was definitely my fault, though he says we broke it. Drying on the counter was a hand-painted platter that Dan and Darren had brought home from Italy, a large, expensive piece of pottery with significant sentimental value. And we, that is I, she writes, somehow unsettled it, and it dropped like a bomb onto the kitchen floor, shattering into shards and dust with a crash that I couldn't believe. Dan and Darren tried to reassure me, saying not to worry, but I was reeling. I felt horrible. Without missing a beat, my wife, my hero, opened her computer, Googled the artist, found their shop online, ordered a duplicate replacement, and announced that this one would have a different sentimental value. All better. Fast forward 6 months, she continues. A package arrives from Dan and Darren. What is it? No, not an Italian platter. Well, not exactly. It is one of a set. It is a mirror with a mosaic of broken pottery around the edge. One of a set. They sent one to us and kept one for themselves. And Dan wrote, quoting Terry Tempest Williams' latest book, Mosaic, Finding Beauty in the Broken World, "A mosaic is a conversation between what is broken. I believe in the beauty of all things broken." It's not our brokenness that is the important piece, but our response from within the brokenness. It is our response that defines us. My colleague, Harvey, broke a beautiful platter. She feared that it would break something in her friendship as well, but rather than allow that to occur, her friends responded with grace. A mosaic is a conversation between what is broken. We all have broken places in our lives. We all have at times caused that brokenness. We have lost, failed, or experienced heartbreak. All of this is par for the course. The part that defines us is the part where the blessing enters. It's how we respond. Let me slip into some theology for a moment. I was reading a book this past week, a novel, written from the perspective of a man with autism. At one point, the character is reflecting on the way some religious people talk to him about the role of God in his disability. The character was told that a disability or accident is God's way of giving people a chance to show their faith and grow in character. Unfortunately, this form of bad theology is not limited to novels. It happens in real life too. Some religious people insist that an all-powerful and all-knowing God must have a good reason for allowing evil or suffering. But that does not make any sense to me, and it never has. God does not cause illness or accidents. God does not cause hurricanes or cancer or abuse. God does not make us stumble for the sake of a lesson, or worse, for someone else's lesson. The brokenness in your life is not God's fault any more than it is your fault. And in the same way that your response to the situation is your defining aspect of character, that is where God will be as well in this progressive theistic understanding of liberal religion. God does not make our lives harder just so that we can grow spiritually. But God is there supporting our response so that we can grow spiritually, even from the hard experiences of brokenness in our lives. The shift from a heart that is broken to a heart that is broken open, from isolation to hospitality, from suffering that creates a wall and suffering that creates an opening, is a shift that I have been trying to articulate for personal reasons for decades. What is the secret to resilience? If there is a balm in Gilead, what is it, and how can we find it? The answer that I have found is about connectedness. The answer is there in Theo Fleury's 4 steps of not giving up before the miracle. In that reading, Fleury starts by talking about that inner hard work of deciding to reach out. that moment inside when you feel the Holy Spirit revive your soul again. And then there is the reaching out. Connect, Fleury says. Connect with God, with nature, with your fellow human beings, friends, families, strangers, anyone, anything. Connect. I close with a piece by Terry Tempest Williams' memoir to illustrate this point. I quoted Williams earlier. It was actually in that piece I was talking about with the platter, in which she wrote, "A mosaic is a conversation between what is broken. I believe in the beauty of all things broken." Williams writes in her memoir about growing up and how many of her relatives had cancer. In particular, in this memoir from this passage, her mother is actively dying from ovarian cancer. And Williams describes how she gets through the loss and the suffering of a day, saying, "I feel calm, having just returned from a brisk walk along the base of the foothills, the balm of fresh air. Great lake, great salt lake, glistening on the horizon, the valleys in sharp focus, crystal clear. I am reminded that what I adore, admire, and draw from Mother is inherent in the earth. My mother's spirit can be recalled simply by my placing my hand on the black humus of mountains or the lean sands of desert. Her love, her warmth, her breath, even her arms around me are the waves, the wind, sunlight, and water. She is resting. The nurse came and gave her a shot of Demerol. All Mother said today is how much she wants to sleep. To not think or feel, just sleep. I never imagined we would walk to a place where what we hoped for was death. Sleep. It's the same thing." I read Mother a poem this afternoon by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting with their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. "Read it again," she said, slowly. So yes, there is a balm. The light breaks through in a moment. The hand of a friend brushes against your own. A poem cuts through the fog. God's love surrounds you with familiar warmth. A breath of grace falls upon your aching eyes, and in a moment you find a strengthening connection. There is a shift from isolation to openness, from a wall to a widening space, from death to life. Gilead's balm is found, and for a time we rest in the grace of the world and are free. In a world without end, may it be so. Let us join in singing our closing hymn, number 1015, I Know I Can.